My girlfriend told everyone we broke up because I was psychologically abusive and manipulative. I let her tell her story for months. Then I released the audio recordings of her begging me to take her back after she cheated. Her friends haven't spoken to her since then. I, 29M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. 6 months ago, my 3-year relationship ended in the most brutal way possible. What followed was a character assassination that nearly destroyed my reputation, my friendships, and my sanity. But sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, the fallout can be devastating. It started on a Tuesday night in January. I came home from work to find her sitting on our couch, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at me with those eyes I'd fallen in love with and told me she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd been seeing someone from her office for 2 months. The confession hit me like a freight train. She begged me to forgive her, said it meant nothing, that she'd ended immediately. She grabbed my hands and pleaded with me to give her another chance. I was too shocked to respond coherently. I told her I needed time to think and went to stay at my brother's place for the night. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I'd been burned before in a previous relationship where my ex had twisted the narrative after we broke up. This time, I wasn't going to let that happen. I started recording our conversations on my phone whenever we talked about the relationship or the cheating. Not to use against her, but to protect myself if things went south. Over the next 3 weeks, we had countless conversations about our future. She called me every day, sometimes multiple times, begging me to reconsider. She admitted the affair had been going on longer than she initially said. She confessed she'd been lying to me about working late when she was actually with him. She promised she'd do anything to make it right. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still loved her despite everything. But trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I told her I couldn't get past what she'd done, that I couldn't look at her without seeing her betrayal. She cried and pleaded, saying she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The final conversation happened on a Friday evening. She came to my apartment one last time, hoping to change my mind. She spent 2 hours explaining how sorry she was, how she'd never forgive herself, how losing me was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. She begged me not to throw away 3 years over one mistake. When I remained firm in my decision, she finally accepted it was over. That weekend, I helped her move her things out. It was civil, even sad. We both cried. She hugged me goodbye and told me she hoped someday I could forgive her. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Within a week, I started getting strange looks from mutual friends. My buddy from college called me and asked if I was okay, mentioning he'd heard some concerning things. When I pressed him for details, he reluctantly told me that she'd been telling people I was psychologically abusive and manipulative throughout our relationship. The accusations were specific and damaging. She claimed I'd isolated her from her friends, controlled her finances, and emotionally manipulated her into staying with me. She said I gaslit her constantly and made her feel worthless. According to her version, she'd finally found the courage to leave me, and I'd retaliated by spreading lies about her cheating. I was stunned. None of it was true. If anything, I'd been the one encouraging her to spend more time with her friends. I'd supported her career moves and never once tried to control her money. The gaslighting accusation was particularly painful because I'd been nothing but honest with her throughout our relationship. But her story was compelling, and she was a good storyteller. She painted herself as the victim who'd finally escaped an abusive relationship. She had people's sympathy, and I had no way to defend myself without looking like I was attacking a victim. The social fallout was swift and brutal. Friends who'd known us as a couple started avoiding me. I was uninvited from parties and gatherings. My reputation in our social circle was in ruins. Some people who barely knew me were posting vague social media messages about supporting survivors and believing women, clearly referencing the situation. I tried reaching out to a few close friends to tell my side of the story, but it felt hopeless. How do you prove you're not abusive? How do you convince people that someone they see as a victim is actually lying? Every attempt to defend myself made me look more guilty. My mental health started deteriorating. I was losing sleep, couldn't concentrate at work, and felt like I was living in an alternate reality where everything I knew about myself was being questioned. I started seeing a therapist just to have someone who would listen to my side without judgment. For months, I watched as she rebuilt her life with the sympathy and support of our former friends. She got promoted at work, started dating someone new, and seemed to be thriving while I was barely surviving. The injustice of it all was eating me alive. I'd almost forgotten about the recordings on my phone until I was cleaning out old files in April. There they were, dozens of audio files documenting our conversations after her confession. I listened to a few and was struck by how different they sounded compared to the narrative she'd been spreading. In these recordings, she wasn't a victim escaping abuse. She was someone who'd cheated on her partner and was desperately trying to save the relationship. She admitted to lying, begged for forgiveness, and took full responsibility for destroying our relationship. There was no mention of abuse, manipulation, or control. Instead, there was genuine remorse and acknowledgement of her betrayal. I sat on those recordings for 2 more months, wrestling with what to do. Part of me wanted to release them immediately to clear my name. But another part of me worried about the ethics of recording someone without their knowledge, even though it was legal in our state. I also knew that once I released them, there would be no going back. The decision was made for me in June when I learned she'd been telling her story to people at my workplace. A colleague mentioned hearing about my abusive behavior from someone who knew her. My professional reputation was now at stake. That night, I carefully selected the most relevant recordings and uploaded them to a private SoundCloud account. I chose clips where she explicitly admitted to cheating, begged me to take her back, and acknowledged that she'd been lying to me. I made sure to edit out any parts that were too personal or irrelevant to the main point. I then created a detailed post explaining my side of the story. I included timestamps and context for each recording. I explained why I'd recorded our conversations and why I was releasing them now. I made it clear that I wasn't trying to hurt her, but simply to defend myself against false accusations that were destroying my life. I shared the post with a few key people in our social circle, people I knew would spread the word. I didn't blast it publicly or try to humiliate her. I just wanted the truth to come out. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who'd been avoiding me for months suddenly reached out to apologize. Friends who'd believed her story without question were now questioning everything. The recordings were undeniable proof that her version of events was fabricated. But the real shock came when I learned about the broader impact. It turned out that several of her closest friends had been having doubts about her story for weeks. Small inconsistencies in her narrative had been bothering them, but they'd pushed those concerns aside out of loyalty. The recordings confirmed their suspicions and validated their doubts. One by one, her support system crumbled. Friends who'd been defending her publicly were now distancing themselves. Her best friend called her out for lying and manipulating everyone's emotions. The women's support group she joined asked her to leave after learning about the recordings. The social media posts supporting her were quietly deleted. People who'd been sharing her story stopped mentioning it. The narrative that had defined our breakup for months was completely reversed in a matter of days. Update 1. The aftermath has been more intense than I expected. She tried calling me multiple times after the recordings went public, but I didn't answer. She sent long text messages alternating between anger and desperation, accusing me of violating her privacy and ruining her life. She threatened legal action, though her lawyer apparently told her she had no case since the recordings were legal and she'd been spreading false information about me. Her new boyfriend broke up with her after hearing the recordings. Apparently, she'd told him the same story about me being abusive, and he felt deceived when he learned the truth. Several of her coworkers have also distanced themselves from her, which has affected her work environment. I've been getting messages from people apologizing for doubting me and condemning her behavior. Some have shared that they'd had similar experiences with her in the past, stories of her twisting situations to make herself look like the victim. It seems this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern I'd been blind to. The most surprising development came from her sister, who reached out to me privately. She apologized for believing the abuse story and revealed that she'd always suspected her sister had a tendency to manipulate situations. She thanked me for finally exposing the truth and said the family had been concerned about her behavior for years. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since everything came out, and the dust is starting to settle. She's essentially been ostracized from our entire social circle. The few people who still talk to her do so out of pity rather than genuine friendship. She's had to find new places to hang out and new people to spend time with because everywhere she goes, people know what she did. I've been getting my life back piece by piece. Friends have been reaching out to include me in activities again. My reputation at work has been restored after I shared the relevant information with HR. The stress and anxiety that had been consuming me for months has finally started to lift. but I'd be lying if I said I felt completely vindicated. Watching someone's life fall apart, even someone who hurt me deeply, isn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. There's a part of me that feels guilty about the extent of the fallout. I wanted to clear my name, not destroy her entire social existence. She's apparently been struggling with the consequences. Mutual acquaintances have mentioned seeing her looking depressed and isolated. She's had to start therapy to deal with the aftermath of her lies being exposed. Part of me wonders if I went too far, but then I remember the months of hell she put me through with her false accusations. The most important thing is that the truth is finally out there. People know what really happened in our relationship and why it ended. I'm no longer walking around with the weight of false accusations hanging over my head. I can rebuild my life and my relationships based on honesty rather than lies. Update 3. A month has passed since I released the recordings, and I'm finally ready to close this chapter of my life. The immediate drama has died down, but the long-term consequences for her continue to unfold. She's had to completely rebuild her social circle and has apparently moved to a different part of town to escape the constant reminders of what happened. I've learned that she tried to reach out to several of our mutual friends to explain her side, claiming the recordings were taken out of context or that I'd somehow manipulated her into saying those things. But the damage was too extensive and too well documented for anyone to believe her new explanations. The experience has taught me valuable lessons about trust, truth, and the power of documentation. I never want to be in a position again where someone can rewrite history and destroy my reputation with lies. I've also learned that sometimes the only way to fight a false narrative is with undeniable proof. I've started dating again, slowly and carefully. I'm more cautious about who I trust and more aware of red flags I might have missed before. The woman I'm seeing now knows the whole story and has been incredibly supportive. She's helped me process the trauma of being falsely accused and has encouraged me to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. As for my ex, I've heard through the grapevine that she's still struggling with the social consequences of her actions. She's apparently told people that I ruined her life by releasing the recordings, still not taking full responsibility for the lies that created the situation in the first place. Some people never learn. I don't regret releasing the recordings. They were the only way to prove my innocence and restore my reputation. The fact that her friends abandoned her afterward says more about the severity of her deception than about my actions. When you build relationships on lies and manipulation, you can't be surprised when they crumble once the truth comes out. The whole experience has been a harsh lesson in human nature and the importance of standing up for yourself when you're being wronged. Sometimes being the bigger person means letting lies destroy your life. Sometimes it means fighting back with the truth, regardless of the consequences for the person who wronged you. I'm finally at peace with what happened and ready to move on with my life. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, and when it does, justice tends to follow. I just wish it hadn't taken so long and caused so much pain along the way.